Hey there and welcome to Matt's Garage. Well, today I'm actually going to be showing you how to inspect a used vehicle for purchase, and I think I'm fairly qualified to do this. I've worked in auto body, both in restoration and collision repair, and I've also worked as a auto mechanic, and I've always worked on cars as a hobby at home as well, so I know every aspect of a car really well, and I know what I'm looking for when I look at a used vehicle. And I've looked at a lot of used vehicles actually. When I just bought this 3 months ago, and when I bought it I looked at a couple of others. My mom just bought a 2016 Dodge Caravan, and I inspected 5 vehicles before we bought one because I'm pretty fussy. And I have a process I think works really good for inspecting the vehicles. Now, number one, you should get a professional mechanic to inspect a car, but you want to do a preliminary inspection so that you're not wasting your money hiring a mechanic to inspect a car that you don't want anyways. So you'd want to do this inspection, and then it's not a bad idea to still bring it to a mechanic and have him put it up on a hoist and check it over really good, and they can scan it for codes and all that kind of thing. Sometimes even if the engine light's not on, there can be a hidden code that a mechanic can access with a higher level scan tool. So things like that can be very valuable to you, especially if you're looking at anything like a German car, like a BMW, Audi, Mercedes. Those kinds of cars have really expensive electronic parts on them that can fail. I also recommend, when you're looking at a car, especially if you're looking at it with a private seller, bring other people with you. Don't go alone. Not to intimidate them, but just to keep them occupied so they're not in your face and in your way as you're trying to inspect a car. Also, so that when you go on your test drive, they're not riding directly next to you, again, talking in your ear when you don't want them to and stuff. That way they can be in the back seat. And those extra people you bring are extra eyes to check over the car. What I like to do, I bring my mom and my son with me, and they inspect the interior of the car. So I have a system for inspecting the cars I think works really well. And what I do is I work around the car in laps, and I just pick one thing to focus on per lap. And so I always start with, kind of inspecting the paint and the body and checking for any body damage, any previous repairs. I'm looking at the panel gaps, how they line up, and sighting down the panels from different angles, and checking that your paint matches from your bumper to your fender is often something you'll see where the bumper color doesn't match. You can also pick out the texture differences in the paint if you're really looking, like the orange peel, the little bumps in the paint. If they're bigger or smaller on another panel, you can tell it's been repainted by that. You want to of course, check your windshield. This one's actually got a crack in it, and looking around there, it's a common area for rust to grow around the windshield. And then pop open your door, and you want to inspect this lip along the bottoms of the doors because that's a common area for rust to grow. Pop open the back door, and you'll see what I mean right there. You see right in the corner there's some rust growing, but that's not bad for my area. I'm right in the rust belt here, so this is pretty good for 10 years old. So as you work around, also check your lights, make sure they're not fogged up. Sometimes they get like condensation, and then they basically have to be replaced at that point. Always be looking at your bumpers for body damage, for stretch marks or anything like that, because these bumpers are tougher than they look, and if they have damage on them, there might be a lot more damage hidden under the vehicle. So I will actually get under the vehicle myself. I always wear grungy clothes, and I'll get under there and I'll look up in behind, and I'll make sure none of this structure looks bent. And while I'm under here, I can sight up under the vehicle and just look at the suspension, look at the undercarriage in general for the condition, sight up the exhaust system. That's another thing you want to be checking when you're inspecting the undercarriage, and make sure the vehicle still has the catalytic converter, because they commonly get stolen. Sometimes people just weld a piece of pipe in there to replace it. So right here is another common area for rust, especially on like SUVs and minivans, right below the glass there. And then we're just going to pop open the hatch. That way you know that it works, especially if it's a power lift gate. And you can kind of inspect around the edge here and just make sure nothing's been retouched, or if it's been hit in the rear, that's an area where you might see it. And you can kind of look at the rear cargo bay here, even though you might have other people checking the interior, but make sure you like lift up the mat and things like that, so in case the carpet was damaged. And check the lip along the bottom of the tailgate here too, because that's another common area for rust. So as you work around the vehicle, just make sure you try all the doors, because I've seen scenarios where door latches didn't work and stuff. Another thing you might not think to try, but you should, is the seat belts. I've seen them be jammed up and not work properly, and all this stuff can get to be pretty pricey. And I'm not really looking at the interior right now, because that will just distract me from checking the body. That's why I like to bring other people to check the interior. But of course, I'll crawl under the vehicle here too and look under the side. And this is where the catalytic converter is located on this vehicle, so I'm making sure that's there. And looking to see if there's any damage from people jacking on it, or tow truck drivers hook hooks and damaged stuff under there. So I'm checking for all that sort of thing. Okay, and now just working around the front of the vehicle, still sighting down everything, making sure things just line up everywhere, checking your lights again, and then sight through your grill, check the condition of the radiator, air conditioning condenser, that sort of thing. And also be looking for anything that looks bent up in here that may indicate accident damage. And then just get under the front here, and you really want to check all this plastic, make sure none of it's broken, then get under there and check for oil leaks. I like to check for oil leaks underneath before I get in the engine bay, and that way I can kind of try to figure out where they originated from higher up on the engine. So now I'm going to do another lap around. This time I'm going to be focusing on the tires, the wheels, the brakes, suspension. So I like to try to rattle the wheels, make sure there's no loose components. I can visualize the brakes through the wheel here pretty good, and I'm checking the tire for any abnormal wear or anything like that, any tire defects. You can actually check the date code on the tire. See, that says 2014 on there. So you know, tires are good for about 5-6 years, then they start to crack out and you want to kind of replace them at that point. So be looking for that sort of thing. So I'm just gonna, you know, kind of bounce from wheel to wheel, walking around, and do that on every wheel, and so on and so forth around the other side of the vehicle. And you know, you can break it down as much as you want, and do as many laps as you want, and just focus on one thing every lap, and that's a really good way to not forget anything as you're working your way around the vehicle. So now we want to move on to the engine bay. You don't want to start the car yet, however. So I really like to check under the hood prior to starting the engine, and I'll check oil condition. I'm not so concerned with level, but you want to make sure it's not burnt black or anything, so that doesn't look too bad. And if the vehicle has a transmission dipstick, this one does not, but if it has one, you want to check that and make sure it's like a nice light red colored, again, not burnt black or even brown. And you want to inspect like the structure, the body structure under here for any damages or any repairs, see if it's been touched up anywhere. Just kind of check all your clips along the front here on these panels, and often they'll get replaced or something if it's been repaired, or you can just tell that they've been removed, or if anything's been put back differently here, or things are missing or whatever. Those are the kind of indicators that it might have been in a collision. And I mean, that doesn't necessarily indicate that it's a bad vehicle just because it's been in an accident. but it's a price consideration for sure, so it's something you want to note before you buy it. There is Carfax, you can check Carfax, but the problem is a lot of vehicles just get fixed privately, and so they're not recorded to Carfax. What I find Carfax useful for is finding scammers. Basically, if you've asked the person a lot of questions about the vehicle and they said things like they owned it for a long time, they were the only owner of it, things like that, and then you go to Carfax and you find out it's had 6 different owners and they just registered it a month ago, then you know they're just flipping that car. So you can maybe just avoid that car then. So some other things you can see here, this has a Hyundai battery in it. That's a good indicator that it was maybe dealer serviced. And you can just look around for other indicators, like is the airbox aftermarket filter, or is it broken up, or you can even pop it open and see how fresh the filter is. You know, check all the fluids, see if, you know, if a bunch of the fluids are low and things like that, and the belt's all cracked up. All those things are little indicators that it maybe wasn't maintained that well. Another thing I recommend is looking at, like, don't rush into one vehicle. Pick out, like, if you're going to look at Hyundai Santa Fe's like this, look at Hyundai Santa Fe's, and like I looked at 3 of them before I bought this one, and that way I kind of got an idea of what things should be like on a Hyundai Santa Fe that way. And so whatever you're looking at, it's like that. You get used to how things are finished here, so you might notice right away if something's been touched up or whatever, and you'll just know, like you'll know the sound of the engine, how the transmission shifts, all those kind of things you'll get familiar with that vehicle, and then you'll be able to pick out one that's not normal, basically. Okay, so now we're going to move on and start the engine. If you can look at a vehicle cold, like ice cold, that's best. A lot of people will warm up an engine to get rid of a tick that's only there when it's cold and things like that. And I like to be standing right next to the engine when it starts, so if you can have your helper go in and start the vehicle, that's even better. For the video here, I'm just going to go in and start it, and I'll just kind of show you what I look for once it's running. So basically, if there's going to be an engine noise, you're going to hear it first when it starts before it gets full oil pressure. And then, especially with these modern engines with the overhead cam and everything, I like to put my ear right on the engine and really listen for ticks and stuff. And some engines have a light tick, but that's what you're listening for, is like a bad tick or kind of a metallic sound. And if you hear something like that, my advice is to move on and look at another vehicle. And if you find they all make, you know, a similar sound, then maybe that's just characteristic for the vehicle. And then you can always go back and get that one. So don't feel pressure to jump on one right away. It's always better to look at a few. And one other thing you really want to do, take your oil cap off while it's running like this. Remove your oil cap and make sure that there's not like vapors coming out here. You can hold your hand over it and check for pressure. There shouldn't be any. If there is, that's a problem. Look at the bottom of your cap. Sometimes they're all creamy and cruddy, and it's very obvious that the oil wasn't changed regularly. So here we are in the interior. The first thing you do, it's nice to check the radio to make sure it works, but then turn it off. Turn your fans all off, turn everything off, and just listen. Make sure there's no bad sounds. And check your air conditioning. Make sure your air conditioning blows cold. This is a real problem if you're looking at the car in cold weather, but do your best. It's the same thing, always do your best to make sure you're able to check things the best you can. So if you have to look at a car in the dark, find a brightly lit parking lot to look at it in. If you have to look at it in the rain, same thing. Go to a gas station and drive under, or something, somewhere where you can find some cover to look at the car comfortably. If the seller is rushing you over the car, that's normally just a sign you should move on to the next car anyways. So now, again, test everything you can test. Lights, everything, because, you know, on some of these newer cars, they have like a $500 ballast in the headlights, so you see a burnt out headlight, you think that's not a big deal. It might be a big deal. Test all your windows, test your power mirrors, all your control sticks, and make absolutely sure you don't have any dash lights on. This is something I like to kind of weed out the bad cars from the ad, because if somebody's legit, most of the time this is the view they're going to give you. They're going to give you this view of the car. You can clearly see the car's running because the tachometer's up, and you can see there's no lights on. Actually, this one does have an airbag light. That's a separate story, but ideally you want no lights on. I don't even bring a scan tool when I test drive cars, because as a rule I just won't consider it if I get there and there's a dash light on. So that's something I try to weed out before I even get there. Okay, I'm not sure how well that shows on camera, but this driving across my yard here, you can hear a clunk in this vehicle. So I know that my front strut plates are worn out, but if you hear a clunk on a test drive and the seller tries to give you some excuse, like they always try to pass stuff off as being minor, so they might say something like the sway bar end link is worn out, because that's a really cheap part compared to other possibilities. You never want to take their word for it. You want to double check that stuff yourself. It could be a real red flag there. It might be worse than a worn part even. Maybe the vehicle was in an accident or something, wasn't fixed proper. Okay, so there's one important thing here that I want to get across. Your job is to test this car fully. So one thing you absolutely want to do on a test drive is floor the car. Right to the floor. You want to run it right to red line. It's the best time to abuse a car is before you buy it. You want to fully test that car, make sure it shifts properly under load, the engine doesn't misfire at high RPMs or anything silly like that. You can baby it after you buy it, but when you're test driving it, make sure you're a little rough on it. You want to fully test everything, hit a bunch of hard bumps, make sure there's no clunks, make sure it tracks well over them, that kind of thing. So we're going to take it on a rough gravel road right now and do just that. See, you hear that clunking right away. So that's what you want to do. You want to hit as many different surfaces as you can, and you want to check, make sure the vehicle's not pulling around on the road, anything like that. Make sure the steering wheel lines up level. All those things are signs of bad alignment. See, this is ideal. You want to get on a rough surface. You don't want to test drive a car on a perfect surface, because it's not going to show off the imperfections of the car. You want to strain and test that car. Pay real attention when you're just engaging gears on the transmission. See how quickly it kind of grabs. Like, does it jerk or does it feel normal when it engages? And then do a couple of accelerations kind of mid-throttle, because sometimes transmissions shift a little funny. If a transmission's on its way out, you want to put it through a few different shift conditions and feel how those shifts feel. And if you feel something funny in there, you know, just walk away. Like I say, check some other cars. Maybe you can come back to that one. If you test drive 2 or 3 others and they're all doing that, well, maybe that's a normal condition for that particular kind of car. But it's your money. Don't throw it away until you're sure. Okay, so I like to do a pretty good test drive. 20 minutes is good. 30 minutes is a bit better if you can do 30 minutes. It depends how serious you are about the car. Try not to waste the seller's time, of course, but things can go wrong. Oftentimes people recharge the air conditioning system with one of those low cans. This just happened to me the other day. We test drove this van, had ice cold air conditioning for about 10 minutes, then the air conditioning quit working. So if I had just taken a quick test drive around the block, I would have probably bought that van, but because I noticed that problem, and you know, air conditioning can be a big one. That can be a couple $1,000s if you have to replace the whole system. So we just avoided that vehicle. And so a long test drive can often find those flaws. A vehicle might not overheat in 10 minutes, but it might overheat after 20 minutes. It might not overheat at low speeds, but it might out on the highway. That's another thing. Absolutely, you want to get this vehicle out there and up to highway speed. That's where you're going to notice vibrations, pulls, all those kind of things that you want to avoid. So that's pretty well going to cover it, and you could use this video as a guideline for buying a classic car too. But if you're buying a classic car, I would do all this stuff as a preliminary inspection, and then I would get that vehicle into a classic car specialist like a restoration shop or an auto body shop that specializes in old cars. Get them to look over that car, like especially if it's like a restored car. You want to look over the quality of that restoration and see if it's just full of Bondo or if it's actually been properly restored. It can make a huge difference in value. One other thing, you can ask some targeted questions, and it's more about reading how they react, reading their body language, how they react to the question, than it is about how they actually answer it. So one good question is, what's your reason for selling the vehicle? And try to just be sudden with these, look straight at them, and just kind of read their reaction. And most people will already have something made up, but just see if you're catching them off guard at all. Also ask if it's ever been in an accident, and ask if it burns oil. And just see if they hesitate on any of these things. If they do, they're probably covering something up there. So. And another thing I want to stress is that just because you're buying a car from a dealer and they say that they inspect it at all, that doesn't mean anything. I bought a $10,000 car from a dealer once that needed $2,500 worth of work, and I inspected it myself and made them do the work. It was all safety items too. It was just crazy, and that's not an isolated incident. Dealers are in the business of buying and selling cars, and they take whatever cars they get on trade basically, and sometimes they'll ship off the bad ones to auction, and sometimes they need inventory and they go out on the lot and get sold. So you need to be aware of that. Even if you're buying a brand new car, you should try to test drive it just in case it has a manufacturing defect. Don't buy into somebody else's nightmare. So that is all. I hope you found the video helpful and informative. Thanks a lot for watching Matt's Garage. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have yourself a great day.